You are not free. You obey. Behind your choices, fantasies, and most intimate desires, there is a force that does not ask permission. It commands. For Arthur Schopenhauer, sexual desire is not an expression of love, pleasure, or freedom. It is an invisible chain, a blind force of nature that uses the individual as a means and then discards him. You believe you desire because you choose to, but Schopenhauer would say you desire because you were programmed to desire. In this video, we dive into Schopenhauer's dark philosophy to reveal how sexual will turn human beings into slaves of their own impulses, trapped in cycles of frustration, illusion, and suffering. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps keep this philosophical content alive and ensures you don't miss future videos that challenge everything you believe about freedom, desire, and control. Now keep watching, because if you think you control your desires, this may be the last illusion you still hold. In 1850, a solitary man in Frankfurt wrote in his diary something that few would dare admit publicly. Arthur Schopenhauer recorded that he had discovered the greatest farce of human existence, that which we call love. It was not gratuitous pessimism. It was a cold observation, almost surgical, based on years of studying human nature. Schopenhauer had perceived something disturbing. He noticed that intelligent, rational, educated people suddenly began acting in a completely irrational way when they fell in love. Men abandoned promising careers. Women risked their social reputation. Everyone seemed possessed by a force they could neither explain nor control. But what truly intrigued the philosopher was not the irrationality itself. It was the pattern. There was something systematic in love's madness. People didn't fall in love with just anyone. There were specific criteria, almost mathematical, that seemed to operate beneath consciousness. In the manuscripts that Schopenhauer left behind, there are passages where he describes this discovery with an anatomist's precision. He realized that what we call chemistry between two people followed very specific biological rules. Tall people were interested in people of medium height. Individuals with certain physical characteristics were attracted to partners who compensated for their deficiencies. It was as if a hidden intelligence was orchestrating romantic encounters. This intelligence, Schopenhauer called the genio da specie, and here the disturbing implications of his discovery begin to become clear. Imagine that you are not exactly who you think you are. Imagine that at least in a fundamental aspect of your life, love, desire, attraction, you are in fact an instrument being used by something greater. Not by a human conspiracy, but by a natural force that needs you to continue existing. Schopenhauer was suggesting that romantic love is a sophisticated illusion, a theatrical play where you think you are the protagonist, but in reality you are just an actor following a script you didn't write. The true director of the play is this force he called Vontade, a blind, unconscious impulse that has only one objective: to ensure that the human species continues reproducing. To understand how Schopenhauer reached this radical conclusion, one must know the context of his era. The Frankfurt of 1850 was a city where Victorian morality reigned on the surface, but underneath simmered a repressed sexual energy. It was a society that pretended sex didn't exist, while brothels flourished discreetly in parallel streets. Schopenhauer had a unique position to observe this hypocrisy. He frequented theaters, operas, social salons, places where he could study human behavior in its most refined state. But he also knew the cruder aspects of human nature. He was an observer of both high society and the more brutal layers of urban life. What he saw was always the same thing: people being led by impulses they didn't fully understand. And the more he observed, the clearer it became that these impulses followed their own logic, independent of the conscious desires of individuals. His records show a particularly revealing observation. Schopenhauer noted that sexual pleasure, however intense it might be, lasted only a few moments. But the consequences, marriages, children, responsibilities, lasted decades. It was as if nature offered a minuscule reward for a gigantic commitment. He began to suspect that this disparity was not an accident. It was a strategy. Nature knew that if humans truly understood the weight of reproductive responsibilities, they might choose not to reproduce. So it created a trap, a pleasure so intense that it made people temporarily forget all the consequences. But the most disturbing part of Schopenhauer's theory was not the existence of this trap. It was the discovery that once the reproductive function was fulfilled, nature simply abandoned individuals to their own fate. Schopenhauer observed couples who, after years of overwhelming passion, suddenly looked at each other like strangers. It wasn't just the end of romance, it was as if an external force had withdrawn, leaving two people completely different from those who originally fell in love. There are accounts that Schopenhauer conducted disturbing mental experiments. He wondered, if we could see love with purely biological eyes, without the layers of cultural romanticization, what would we see? The answer, for him, was clear. We would see two organisms being manipulated by their own bodies to create a third organism. The philosopher realized that this manipulation was so subtle that those involved believed they were acting of their own free will. Couples thought they chose each other for spiritual affinities, shared values, deep emotional connection. But when Schopenhauer analyzed these choices, he discovered that they followed specific biological patterns that favored the creation of healthy descendants. It was like discovering that your favorite coffee brand is not chosen for taste but for chemical substances that manipulate your neural receptors. The subjective experience remains the same. You still feel pleasure when drinking the coffee. But the origin of that pleasure reveals itself to be completely different from what you imagined. Schopenhauer was proposing something even more radical. He was saying that the very identity we have as unique and free individuals may be largely an illusion created by the need for reproduction. We are unique only insofar as our uniqueness serves the purposes of species continuity. This discovery led him to an even more disturbing conclusion. If love is an illusion, and if our individual identity is largely shaped by reproductive necessity, then what remains of the authentic self? What survives when we remove all the layers of self-deception that nature has built to keep us productively reproducing? For Schopenhauer, this was the fundamental question of human existence, and his answer would go against everything Western culture had built about love, romance, and personal fulfillment. But before we reach his most radical conclusions, it is necessary to understand how this force he called genio da especie operates in practice. How exactly are we manipulated without realizing it? And why is this manipulation so effective that most people live their entire lives without questioning it? The answer was hidden in details that nobody paid attention to. Schopenhauer realized that the genio da specie does not operate through direct commands or obvious impulses. It works through something much more subtle, the manipulation of aesthetic perception. When you look at someone and feel an instant chemistry, what is really happening? Schopenhauer discovered that this chemistry follows very specific patterns. A person with a small jaw feels attracted to someone with a prominent jaw. Individuals with certain body proportions are magnetically attracted to partners who possess exactly the characteristics that will compensate for their own genetic limitations. It's not coincidence, it's biological mathematics disguised as romantic feeling. Schopenhauer's records show that he even made diagrams, almost like a scientist studying chemical reactions. He mapped how different types of people attract each other, always following an unconscious reproductive logic. It was as if each individual carried a kind of genetic blueprint that made them automatically seek the ideal partner to create the next generation. But perhaps Schopenhauer's most unsettling discovery was realizing that this programming was not limited to physical attraction. It extended to aspects we consider purely psychological or spiritual. Introverted people fall in love with extroverts. Anxious individuals feel irresistibly attracted to calm and stable partners. Again, not by chance. Nature is trying to create balance in offspring, using the parents as ingredients for a recipe they don't know. Schopenhauer realized that even what we call love at first sight can be explained by this hidden logic. The brain makes instant and unconscious calculations about reproductive compatibility, but translates these calculations into the language of romance and passion. It's as if nature knew that you would be excellent genetic material for my children is not exactly a declaration that inspires poetry. This discovery led Schopenhauer to a disturbing conclusion about free will. If our most intimate love choices are determined by unconscious biological calculations, to what extent are we really free? There are accounts that this perception caused in Schopenhauer a kind of bitter awakening. He began to see the romantic dramas around him as theatrical plays where the actors believed they were improvising, but were actually following a script rigorously determined by biology. And then came the cruelest part of the discovery. Schopenhauer observed that once the reproductive function was fulfilled, or even just the simulation of that function through the sexual act, something strange happened. The enchantment simply disappeared. It was as if an external force had withdrawn, leaving two people looking at each other and wondering, what was I thinking? What before seemed like a cosmic connection revealed itself as a sophisticated biological trap. Schopenhauer documented this phenomenon with a surgeon's precision. He noticed that couples who had become parents often experienced a kind of melancholic awakening. It wasn't postpartum depression, it was something different. It was as if they could finally see clearly without the rose-colored lenses that nature had placed over their eyes. But the implications of this theory extend far beyond the 19th century. If we transpose Schopenhauer's ideas to the contemporary world, we find disturbing parallels he could never have imagined. Consider dating applications. At first glance, they seem like tools that increase our freedom of choice. We have access to thousands of potential partners we can select based on specific criteria. We totally control the selection process. Or at least, that's what we believe. But a more careful analysis reveals something different. The algorithms of these applications operate exactly like the génie de spécie that Schopenhauer described. They analyze behavior patterns, unconscious preferences, micro-expressions captured in photographs. And then they present us with exactly the type of person our biology is programmed to desire. It's the génie de spécie operating through computer code. And pornography? Schopenhauer would probably see it as the purest manifestation of nature's cruelty. Its sexual desire short-circuited all the intensity of attraction without any possibility of real reproduction. It's as if nature had created a drug that perfectly simulates the rewards of reproductive sex, but never delivers the final satisfaction that would theoretically justify all this desire. The result, according to Schopenhauerian logic, is a vicious cycle. The individual experiences all the intensity of desire, obtains a simulation of satisfaction, but never reaches the state of mission accomplished that would allow nature to release its grip. It's perpetual desire without biological resolution. Perhaps that's why many people report a strange sensation after consuming pornography. Not just moral or social guilt, but a kind of existential emptiness, as if they had been deceived by their own bodies. Schopenhauer would have interpreted this as evidence that the Volonté, this blind force that drives us, doesn't care about our individual happiness. It only cares about the perpetuation of the species. When we simulate reproduction without actually reproducing, we create confusion in the system. Nature doesn't know how to process this contradictory information. But is there an escape from this trap? Schopenhauer believes so, although his solution is as radical as his diagnosis of the problem. The key, according to him, lies in consciousness. Once we truly understand that our most intimate desires are not ours, that they are instruments of a greater force that doesn't care about our well-being, something fundamental changes in our relationship with these desires. It's not about repressing or denying them. It's about observing them with detachment, like a scientist observes a chemical reaction. When you understand that the overwhelming passion you feel for someone is largely the result of unconscious genetic calculations, that passion doesn't necessarily disappear but loses its absolute power over you. It's like discovering that the magician is using tricks. The show can still be impressive, but you don't get hypnotized in the same way. Schopenhauer called this the negation of the Volonté. It doesn't mean forced celibacy or complete rejection of relationships. It means freedom. The freedom to choose consciously instead of being dragged by impulses that serve purposes that are not yours. But here arises a disturbing question. If we achieve this liberation, if we really become immune to the manipulation of the génie d'espèce, what happens to the continuity of the human species? Was Schopenhauer inadvertently proposing a path that could lead to voluntary extinction of humanity? Perhaps this is the deepest question raised by his philosophy, and perhaps that's why his ideas continue to be as disturbing today as they were in 1850. They force us to confront a possibility we prefer not to consider, that our individual freedom and the survival of our species may be in fundamental conflict. And if it's true, what choice do we make?